We're now going to mic the piston by using the spec that the piston manufacturer gave us. Now, using the marks that I placed on the piston at the gauge point, I will now use them to line up my micrometer and get my actual piston diameter. I zeroed out our bore gauge to the mic'd out spec of the piston, which happens to be 3.4215 inches, which is what is on the spec sheet. I allowed for a clearance of 40 thousandths to 45 thousandths for piston to cylinder wall clearance. This particular piston manufacturer wants you to measure the ring end gap at anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 inch from the top of the cylinder bore. Okay, we'll now take our feeler gauge and see what our gap is. We'll now take our ring, put it in our ring cutter. So now we'll hang our rod and piston combo, and it starts by lubricating our rod piston with a engine assembly lube. These are the locks that will now hold the pin in place in the piston, and what I like to do is I always like to sand these or file these down. So our first step of assembly will be cleaning all of our particular parts, and for this engine we'll start with the crankshaft. We're now going to remove the main caps and girdle to get ready for crankshaft installation. So now we're ready to drop in our crankshaft. These are our thrust bearings. They go on the number 3 journal on an SR. There are 2 of them, one for the clutch side and one for the dampener side. You want to check for any tight spots. It should spin very, very freely. We don't have any pistons or rods, no rings, no nothing. And this is where that WPC coating really helps out, because I mean, I'm barely even turning this thing and it's just nice and smooth. Now, this is a fairly specialized tool. They're not that expensive. It's a ring compressor. Some of you might be familiar with the ones that you ratchet down and compress the springs down, but this is actually way simpler. You buy them for the particular bore that you're using. This particular block is an 87mm bore, so this is what we will use to install the pistons into the block. So now we'll set our ring orientation. Now, when you're pushing these down, you want to make sure that the rod doesn't hit the counterweight, because if it hits the counterweight, then it won't go in correctly. We're now ready to install our rear main seal cover. I've applied our RTV gasket sealant, added a little bit of lubrication of oil so it'll slide over the end of the crankshaft better. So we'll now install our timing chain. The factory timing chain has 3 gold links, 2 at the top and 1 at the bottom. And do not be tempted to put gasket sealant in this groove here. So now this is our oil pickup. We will now prime the pump with just some fresh engine oil. We're using an 87mm MLS Cometic gasket for the SR20. Now what we got here is a dial indicator on an old lifter with a dial indicator shaft in it. And what we're going to do is we're now going to check these heights just in case you guys have messed them up or took them out and didn't take the sequence down. So we're now going to bleed our stock hydraulic lifters. Now these lifters are not self-bleeding. It says it in the manual. You need to bleed them yourself. So this is the rest of our SR valve train. Consists of June 272 11.5mm camshafts. We have our Greddy adjustable cam sprockets. We also have our Peak Performance rocker arm stoppers and all of our bearing caps themselves.